an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood, Season 2, Episode 3, New Money. In this episode, a new player is in town, and he is sinister. He tends to play this type, I feel. I am not excited about potentially seeing a prostitute get beaten up, and I hope I do not have to watch that happen. This whole episode made me feel bad. There was a lot of sad stuff happening. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Patrick for commissioning this episode. This is a really, for me, tough episode for a few reasons. So it turns out, and Patrick messaged me this yesterday, that the dude who plays Francis, I believe his last name is Wolcott, is the same guy who plays Jack McCall from last season, which is really kind of funny because he's the dude who winds up getting offered Wild Bill's letter. And considering that he played the guy that killed Wild Bill, it coming kind of weirdly full circle in that manner with him being offered something that was the last of his writing of his life is a weirdly poetic symmetry that I rather like. But he was in Justified, and he played a weirdly similar character in some ways to this, in that he was a bigger player's right hand message man, and he was meant to in Justified conceal the actual identity of his employer, so he would say things of a similar nature, just referring to, well, my employer such and such. It was a little bit like deja vu watching some of his dialogue in this, because it felt so similar. And in that, he is also somebody who's really ruthless in an ugly way. The kind of person who is willing to kill an old couple and burn their house down, kind of thing. So the fact that he is a guy who's interested in beating up women and getting violent with them is not really off-brand for this dude, actually. And I spent so much of the episode really worried that we were going to have to see that, and I'm still worried. I'm hoping that it's not going to be a front and center thing, that it'll, if it does happen, merely be hinted at and we won't have to actually watch it. Because that sort of thing, I don't think is usually necessary. Even the scene in the first episode where Al stands on Trixie's neck, basically, even that was rough, so I'm worried about it, but we'll see how that goes. So let's bring up Al now that I mentioned his name, because the main part of this episode has to do with the fact that Al is out of commission, and it seems like Al is a planet that so many people and things orbit around, that when he is not available, they have no idea what anything means anymore. They don't have any center. They don't have a purpose. And they all just sort of stand around waiting for things to return to normal. But nobody, I would like to point out, except Jewel, really has the presence of mind to finally take action. Trixie threatens that she will be coming back with the doc and break the door down if he isn't up and about in a couple of hours. But it's Jewel who's just like finally had enough and is the one who gets Dan to like come up and break it down. And I was just like, you know what, Jewel, I swear to God, you're the only one with the friggin' like guts to come up against Al, I swear. But yeah, Al's being like, I don't want to really call it a power vacuum because I feel like that implies somebody actually being completely gone. And obviously this is a temporary thing, I believe, that, you know, he'll recover and he will be okay. But it's pretty close to that, where there's just this weird sense of anticipation and listlessness in the camp, and everybody standing around like unsure what to do without having orders to follow, you know? And I really enjoyed what this leads to in terms of some other people's conversations. But the first scene, we start off seeing Al curled up on the floor in practically the fetal position. It's not even quite. Like, it seems like he's probably in so much pain that kind of movement, curling on himself, would be too painful. And he is shaking and sweating, and in the kind of pain that leaves you unable to like breathe or think. And obviously it comes down to him having too much pride to ask for help. When I first saw this, I wondered if he wasn't unable to ask for help, that maybe he was like past the point of being able to speak. But it seems really that he could have been able to if he wanted, and he just doesn't want anybody to see him like this, which is just such a frustrating thing. Dude, yeah, it's undignified. What the fuck else is new? You know what's also undignified? Dying of this on your floor and then finding your body later. What a sad, preventable way to die. Come on, man, think this through. So yeah, he's in a bad way. And meanwhile, like, we have some of the women that are standing outside his door because they're waiting for the place to open. We have Dan and Johnny who are standing downstairs. Like, Dan is kind of yelling at these girls to leave him alone, that will open when Al says. And it's just like everybody on tenterhooks waiting for a word to send them into motion. Then we have the arrival of Francis Wolcott. Now, this is obviously a guy of some means. He's got a really like nicely tailored outfit on, and he's coming into EB's place, and EB mistakenly thinks that he is somebody he can swindle. It's a really kind of like this con that he's trying to pull on this dude is so poorly thought out. I don't know what EB was thinking, even if he wasn't, as it turns out, dealing with one of Hearst's men. It felt really clear to me that Francis was planning to open that letter. EB kept saying things about like, well, let's just say I'm signing it over the intent to deliver. And he keeps saying things like he's trying to bring it back around to a use for this letter that he prefers, even though Francis has made it really clear that he's going to open this. That's 100% what is going to happen here. And EB's like willfully ignoring that because he's just so fucking greedy. And then winds up getting himself into this position where he's like pissed off a major player. And now he's like indebted to this guy more so, I would think, than even Al. So that's rough. Like, Al has kind of, you know, I don't know how long it's going to take before he assesses this damage, but EB is no longer going to be his guy. I feel like this dude has more leverage over him in a lot of ways. And I'm sure that depends, because EB can, like, would view, I think, his partnership with Al as being, in the end, more advantageous to him, and his, quote, partnership, and I don't really mean it, with Francis is just him trying to prevent punishment, which is a whole other thing. So this leads me to think that if EB can double deal against Francis, he will, but EB's not good at that sort of thing, so I don't anticipate that working out super well for him. I really don't know if I see EB like surviving this show. I don't know that I think he's going to die this season. I don't really think that, because he is a pretty compelling, weirdly, and useful character. But I just feel like he dances so close to the line so much of the time that he's going to have to die at some point, because he just makes a lot of mistakes and manages to escape the consequences with a lot of like sort of sleight of hand, I want to say, or emergency like tactics that he like pulls out of nowhere. But you can only do that so many times, you know? So yeah, he sees this dude and thinks this guy is going to be some kind of mark, and that is not who Francis is. Meanwhile, Seth is all settled up in his house with his wife, and she is making breakfast. I always think about this kind of thing. Like, he comes downstairs having just dressed, and she's already up and making breakfast. Like, she has to get up at least an hour before him. And that was probably like the way of things always, right? The woman would have to get up before everybody else, and probably after cleaning up after dinner and went to bed after everyone else. That's rough. But yeah, he says, I regret certain things that I said yesterday, and I will be grateful if you'd not rely on them. And she says, okay. And he says, representations I made as to letters I'd written, I didn't. And she says, I'd be grateful then if you not rely on my assurance that I got them. And he sort of like grins at her and is like, yeah, okay. So essentially, this is the subtext here is, you know, I lied about writing to you about Alma, and I'm assuming you realize that it's because I had something going on with her, and that is over. And she's like, okay, I believe that it's over, and we are just going to continue to live as we are now and leave the past in the past. And he seems to respect that she's just sort of like, you know, going to be willing to move on, you know? I like scenes like this where people are not exactly saying what they need to say, but we all still get what the fuck is going on. All right, so let's talk about what's going on with Joni and Maddie. Is that her name? I think it is. But yeah, okay. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to make some guesses about this. So we know by the end of this episode that what's going on here is that Francis is being sent into the camp by his employer, John Hurst. Is it John? And he is essentially, what they want to do is create a false impression on everybody who is in this camp with any kind of stakes and who is on a claim. They want to create the false impression that this camp is not actually going to be absorbed by the United States, that something is going to happen to it to like cause it to be dissolved. And potentially, I think the like long-term implication would be this land to be returned to the Sioux. And what he wants in doing this, it's basically like, you know, short sales. You know, he wants everybody to panic dump their claims and sell them for like whatever low price they can to get out as quickly as they can. And then him as the messenger for John Hurst, he can scoop them all up at a hugely discounted rate. And then Hurst will be positioned as a major player in a camp that is assuredly going to be picked up by the U.S. in the end, after all. So basically, if this dude is interested And if Hearst is interested, that means that this camp is almost guaranteed to be absorbed by the United States. Like, they would not be wasting their time if they didn't have some insider knowledge of the fact that things are going to be worked out here and this is a valuable place to be. But what he wants is to find some partners that he knows are on his own level, pair up with them, spread these rumors, and then him and his partner can go into this basically owning the town by the time that it's like officially sanctioned. And it's just so underhanded, and it's like really smart. In some ways, I would even say that I kind of admire it, because I just find tactical stuff like this to be fascinating, and I do like the I like, in an abstract, hypothetical way, watching these kinds of games play out and seeing what happens. I do not like the actual effect that this has, which is to, cause a bunch of people to, like, lose money, uproot their families, potentially, like, lose fortunes over it. And I'm really hoping that Alma doesn't fall for this bullshit and try and bail. She's the one that I think is the most at risk here, but she has some pretty shrewd people behind her. And I'm hoping that that isn't going to be an issue for her at some point. So anyway, this whole thing here with Maddie, she was aware who this man that she calls Mr. W, she was aware that he was coming to this camp, and she purposely came to work with Joni because she knows that this dude's heading here, and she's hoping that she's going to be able to get her fingers into this pie as well. I am not entirely certain what she's hoping she can do with him, though, because what she tells Joni is that, like, he gets very violent when he's disappointed. And I have the particular girl that he is interested in hidden away somewhere, so that he's going to show up wanting her and she won't be there. She's trying to disappoint him. And I think what she's doing is that she wants to get him to lose it, very much hurt or like potentially kill someone, so that she can blackmail him with what he's done, I think is the thing. Which is a really, like, convoluted plan, but I mean, I guess it could work when you are in the kind of, when you are first a woman, and secondly, doing the kind of work that Maddie and Joni do that is not respected in and of itself, plus they're women. You have to be able to grab at power in backward sort of, like, sneaky ways. And I think they're doing the best they can with what they're allowed. Patrick says, "Hi, Natasha, you got it, except I believe the idea is that the rumors the government is going to take their claims when it becomes part of the U.S., so sell now before the government takes everything." Oh, okay, interesting. I didn't even know that that was something that could happen. But maybe it can't happen. Maybe that's part of the point, is that nobody really knows how this would work out. So they can just say whatever because nobody's sure how things tend to be handled in these situations. So yeah, Maddie is just, she has her own whole plan here. And Joni's like low-key offended by the fact that Maddie has her own game in play. And I think just wanted Maddie to be on her side for the sake of it, because solidarity. I think that's what she was thinking. And to find out that Joni has this whole other plan that she is working with and didn't tell Joni anything about until the dude actually shows up in camp. Joni takes offense to that and feels like, this is my business that I, like, let you in on. And the least you could do is keep me in the loop about what's fucking happening. And reasonably, Maddie says, "Joni, look, I get it, and I understand that you feel this way, but if you step back and look at this, you know that there was a possibility, despite all of your assurances on my way here, you know that there was a possibility you were going to change your mind and I was going to arrive here and you weren't actually going to go through with this. And Joni, like, is sort of, you know, reluctant to admit that, but she finally does. She's like, yeah, I mean, okay, it was a possibility. And Maddie's like, yeah, I'm not going to put all my cards on the table with somebody that I'm not entirely sure I'm going to even wind up being in business with, because you could use this information yourself. If I gave it to you and then you decided you were going to stick with Cy, you could tell Cy all of this and he could set up the same trap that I am. Why would I do that? And of course, I'm also not going to tell you because I didn't know for sure that he'd come into this camp. I figured he would. I have an idea how these people operate, but I wasn't sure how this was all going to shake out. So of course I didn't tell you. Like, I'm telling you now because I'm sure of my position in all of this, but you can't really blame me for trying to, like, guard this. And Joni's begrudgingly like, yeah, okay. And this leads to this scene later where he's coming, he gets asked where the most high-end brothel in town is. I think that's basically almost exactly how he words it. It's just like a higher class establishment when he asks EB, and he directs him to this one, which it's interesting how different everything is set up. Like, you know, it's not like there isn't drinking. There's a bar and everything in Bella Union, but most of the space is taken up with different gambling tables. And at the Gem, it's really like, it's a bar / brothel, and people happen to gamble there, but it's not set up as a casino type thing. The Bella Union is set up very purposefully in that way. And then I'm trying to remember, the Chez Ami, I think is the name of the place that Joni has opened, is much less, it feels much more like a lounge. It's not like, there isn't even a bar that I could see. At one point I'm sure they serve alcohol, like, don't get me wrong, but it's not set up in the same way, and everything feels a lot more direct. Like, the room that he takes Joni off to is right off of the main room. It's not even up a set of stairs or anything. So it's just a lot smaller and a lot more, like, specialized, I guess. And, excuse me. I just find it interesting to see, you know, when you think of somebody opening a brothel, I just didn't really think about all of the various ways that you could open a brothel, all of the different, like, forms that could take, and the different ways that you present what you do to clients, and the different, like, means of getting them in the door. Like, it feels like at the Gem, you get guys in there to drink, and then they get horny, and there happens to be a brothel upstairs. This is like, you're coming to Chez Ami to find a hooker, not like as a, well, I'm just going to sit and have a drink and see how I feel. And I'm wondering how this is going to work out for them, because the place is really empty. And she says something like, well, you caught us half an hour before we open. But, like, did he, or is she just saying that because that's like a salesmanship sort of thing, that we're going to give you special treatment an hour or like half an hour before we actually open to the public? The kind of thing like, well, normally I say $15, but for you, $10, you know, kind of thing. And Joni goes in there with him, and she, having been forewarned, because she asks Maddie what the girl that Maddie is planning on handing over to him is going to get out of it. And Maddie says it's very likely a pine box, which is brutal. Brutal. Like, Maddie is just like, I am willing to let one of these girls die in order to get the blackmail material that I need. That's yikes, you know? And you can see that Joni is a little disturbed by this. Like, I think that she just wants to be in business with somebody that doesn't see these women as disposable. And I think she expected Maddie to be less ruthless And the fact that Maddie is treating these girls this way immediately bothers Joni. Like, she needed a partner, and she's glad it's a woman and all of that. But she just wants somebody who, like, seems to really give a shit. And she's not finding anybody. And I think that just disappoints her, you know? So Joni decides that she's going to put herself in his way. That even though he is upset that this girl, I think it's Amanda, something like that, is the one that he's, like, looking for. Even though he's upset that she's not there, Joni decides to sort of, like, try and take his attention. It's really something how Joni says, "Would fucking something else help calm you down?" Something. Excuse me. My throat is still not completely cleared up. She doesn't say someone. She says, "Would fucking something else?" Which is the language that we've heard Allie use before as well. He says something like, "I need to fuck something," and then summons Trixie. And it's just so gross that, like, Joni is referring to herself in this manner. And I don't think it's that she really feels this way. I think that she's trying to distance herself from it and talking to this guy in a way that she thinks he will understand. And he doesn't seem super keen on her, like, which makes sense. If this is a man who gets off on beating women and maybe raping women, he is not going to want somebody who is as self-assured as Joni, right? She's confident. She has things under control. He's not going to want this type of woman unless part of the appeal for him is beating the confidence out of her, which that's certainly a thing. You know, some men go after women that they feel like are a little bit too uppity in order to put them in their place and humiliate them specifically. But it doesn't seem like that's what he's after exactly. And so Joni, being as sort of like distant and not coquettish and not flirty, it's just this weird, like, aggression right under the surface from her. It's not really doing it for him. So there's this long, like back and forth between them when she goes into the bedroom, where it seems like he's going to initiate something between the two of them. He, like, sits down and tells her to take his shirt off. And she comes over and starts to undress him. And it sort of feels like he's testing out to see exactly how she handles all of this. When she looks at him, he tells her, "Don't look me in the face." And she doesn't for exactly like 20 seconds. And then a second later, she does look him in the face. And it feels like a combo of things. Like, she doesn't want to give him the satisfaction of letting him think that he's scaring her. And she also, like, resents that he's ordering her around the way that he is. Like, she wants to let him know that she is aware of what he is in a way. And this results in him just being like, "Nah, you know what? I don't think so. But I admire the fact that you came armed." Meanwhile, Maddie is outside frantic because Joni makes sure to flash the fact that she is armed as she walks into that room with the guy. So Maddie has this whole carefully laid plan, and she's, like, really worried that maybe Joni's just going to fucking murder this guy, and then he's going to be taken out of play altogether. And not only would that ruin her plan, but then it's going to get back to Mr. Hurst that his right-hand guy was murdered in a brothel, and he's going to come the fuck down on them hard, and it's going to be really bad. So, you know, I don't know if Joni has considered all of those possibilities. I figure that she has, and to her, all of that is worth a girl not dying. And for Maddie, it's not. And that just shows you exactly who Maddie is. I find it in some ways just as disappointing as Joni that Maddie is this way, because I also want somebody who's like an advocate at all for any of these women. At the same time, I think it's really important that we remember that women will victimize each other this way all the time. there are plenty of women who are involved in like human trafficking. And there are a lot of, like, you see all the time women who are arrested for like pimping out their own daughters. You know, it's like when they're children. This is a very real thing. So just a woman you would want to be more sympathetic to their fellow women when they're being abused and taken advantage of like this. But that's simply not how it works, because there is a structure of power in place. And there are some women who they don't care who they're hurting as long as they are high enough up in the hierarchy to not be hurt themselves. And that's really what it comes down to, I think, a lot of the time. It's like a greed and for power and safety of a kind within the society that we live in. And it's just really like, it's very real. It's just hard to watch, you know. But there's a reason that like Maddie is still alive at the age that she is after doing what she's done. And it's because she's fucking shrewd, you know. So I feel for Joni, because I want her to have a real ally so bad, and it doesn't feel like she's ever gonna find that. And I don't know what that even would look like, you know. Ideally, and I've already said that I would love it if her and Charlie Utter teamed up. But frankly, I take that back at this point, because I think Joni really does need it to be a woman. So I would like it if her and Trixie could go off and do a thing. That would be awesome, especially because Trixie has expressed interest in doing like accounting. And that would be really great if she could, like, you know, be in that role for Joni. But that's all hypotheticals right now. And I don't feel like Trixie going off and working for another brothel would be looked upon too kindly by Mr. Al Swearingen. So I pretty much covered that whole thing. Let us go back and deal with what's going on with Seth. He comes out in the morning, and his son is saying goodbye to this kid that he's like befriended. It's a shame, you know. I guess that I don't know exactly how they met this soon, because I really did get the impression that this was like the next morning. So I don't know how they like became friends so quick, but you know how kids are. They just like, there's not a lot of kids in this camp, so they might have just spotted each other and then just whatever. But it turns out this kid is getting on a wagon and riding out with his dad and not coming back. And he hasn't got anybody to hang out with or any friends. And there's no school established here. There's not a lot for him to do. And this is a kind of a fascinating conundrum for me, being in a place that isn't a farm. He can't go out and, you know, do that kind of thing. I'm sure people go out and hunt, but we haven't really seen that. We've seen a meat market. It's a settlement, you know. He doesn't have anything to do. And I'm curious how this is all going to shake out, because Seth, really, the only other kid that he knows is Sophia. And he sort of like goes to ask if maybe Alma would allow him to play with Sophia, but like, she's a girl and she's much younger than him. And in this era, those things matter a lot. And it just, I don't know that that's going to be anything for him. I know, you just kind of feel for this kid. Meanwhile, Alma is getting led around her claim and by Ellsworth, and it's fucking hustling and bustling. It looks like she's got at least 30 people working for her. And when the camera pulls back, it might well be more than that. And her claim is just big. And he says something, because she has like a 5 stamp machine, and the stamps are these mallets, basically. It's motorized, I imagine, by like water from the stream or something. And it crushes the quartz that the gold is trapped in. And he says that she could really have like a 25 stamp machine if she was able to get a hold of one, that there's enough quartz turning up on this claim that would absolutely be like necessary. And he says that's just a matter of waiting till the legalities get resolved. And she says, and why would the purchase of a larger machine await legal resolution? And he says, well, ma'am, because without title, you wouldn't own no quartz for your 25 stamp machine to crush. I don't understand what he means here. Without title to the claim, I thought she already had that. I'm not entirely sure what he means by that, but she looks irritated and like kind of pulls her arm out of his at this point, and it feels like I don't know, it just seems like she doesn't appreciate whatever he said, and I'm not entirely clear on what he even meant. So help me out if anybody can. But it becomes very clear that she is not in a good mood. Like, this whole thing with Seth has really affected her mental state. And I mean this in like the most sort of basic way possible. It's just, she's heartbroken and she has to face this guy all the time in town. Like, they run into each other in this episode at one point and don't even say a word to one another. And Seth is in the position where, like, you know, he's been neglecting his duties because of her. And now he is in the position where breaking up with her and resuming his role as husband and sheriff means that he has a lot of catching up. He has a lot of work to do. He has a lot of, like, responsibilities that are feeling a lot fresher and more forefront in his mind than they were. And therefore, he's got plenty to distract him from this heartbreak. It's, you know, one could argue which is the more healthy. But Alma is not in that position. He has this family, a new home, his job, all of these things to worry about. Alma has not got a home yet. She is in charge of this child, but the child has a tutor right now, who is caring for her. There's not a lot for Alma to focus on in terms of putting her energy that was used towards this romance towards something else in her life. And it's clear as this episode continues that she is looking for a way to direct that energy, but she's not looking to do it in a productive way. She's looking to do it in a, I'm angry and need to take it out on someone way, which is a very different thing. And the first thing that comes to mind, I found pretty amusing, which is that she's thinking maybe she'll buy the hotel from EB, put him out on the street, essentially. They keep using the word thoroughfare in this episode. I'd like to see him cast upon the thoroughfare. And turn his hotel into her own residence. And when Ellsworth is kind of like, there are way better locations, and also there's like, the view from the hotel isn't exactly pleasant. Like, you're right on top of everything. I feel like you could do better. And she's just like, oh no, I know it's not a great spot or anything. I just hate him and I want him to be miserable. And I really like to see him sad. Damn, girl. Like, she is not even hiding. It's kind of amusing to see how unsure Ellsworth is of how to respond within this whole conversation. He's just clearly like, he's kind of amused, but also like it feels a little bit like grossed out by it. And I sympathize. There are like, I've had conversations like this where on the one hand, what this person is saying is like kind of amusing me. And on the other hand, I'm like, I can't believe that you are that brazen that you will just say that shit out loud right now. Like, you know, it's, Ellsworth is an interesting character, and right now he's sort of like on the sidelines, and I don't have a complete view of how he feels about things. But I think he recognizes the mental state that she's in, and he's trying to keep her from making a mistake. Like, I get the feeling he's a little bit more savvy than I have been giving him credit for in terms of how to like handle people. And, yeah, he just, is like kind of like, he obviously doesn't like EB any better than her. Nobody likes EB. He's a fucking weasel, you know? But the blatantness of this, like, let me take his property away and upset him on purpose. He isn't used to that. And I'm really, if she went through with something like this, I wonder what kind of support he would use. But anyway, so this ends with, and I'm going to jump ahead here to the scene between her and the governess, tutor, whatever. I'm kind of calling her a governess because she does more than just watch, you know. Or just does more than just teach. She takes care of her throughout the day. And I feel like that warrants governess on top of everything. Okay, so this scene is really hard. You returned his timepiece. Yes. I thought I had told you. You did, Miss Isringhausen. I'm recurring to the topic, hoping you will be more expansive. He accepted the timepiece, ma'am, and raised another subject you and I ought to pursue at some different moment. Must I credit the right of that ought, Miss Isringhausen, or may I suspect you enjoy setting terms? Right out of the gate. Wow, Alma? Jesus Christ, lady, calm the fuck down. She is so bad about using her power, her social power over people when she gets upset. And it's really ugly. It's an ugly side to her. I appreciate that it's there because that feels like, again, what I was saying about Maddie and Joni. They're using the tools that they have. This feels exactly like what you would do when you don't have a lot of ways to lash out. You're going to use what you can. And her social standing and superiority in that arena to Miss Isringhausen is the only thing she's got, really. So, of course, she's going to... But it's just really unpleasant to watch. Playing arbiter to the when and the why of things. And gives her this look as she says it. And Miss Isringhausen, pursuing the second subject Mr. Bullitt raised, might upset a person now present, junior to you and me. Which, like, honestly... Sorry, I keep having to clear my throat, but... honestly, I don't think that that's true. I don't really know why she thinks it would be upsetting. Because what it comes down to is I think he wants to talk to you about whether or not your little girl can play with his little boy. And I feel like, you know, I guess she's thinking that if you say no, that will be really disappointing to Sophia. So maybe we shouldn't let her hear in case of you determining that this is a bad idea. Because she will be aware that she has been denied a friend because of your relationship with this guy, which doesn't really feel fair. But it will upset her in that way. So let's just not. And I guess I see that. But I do feel like maybe she should have read the room a little bit more and just gone ahead and said what she needed to say. And Alma rejoins with... I fail to see how that could be more unpleasant than the aura of relentless disapproval that you so consistently generate. And the tutor gets this like kind of wide-eyed like, oh shit, look. And she just says, I have no further need of your services. And Miss Isringhausen says, I will say good night, and gets up, obviously hoping that this is just a really bad flare of temper and that she will regret it and take it back in the morning. But, of course, Alma can't even, like, let that go. She says, I would prefer it if you would say goodbye. And finally, Miss Isringhausen, clearly kind of panicking, says, I wonder, ma'am, if having made so many decisions so quickly, your patience may be short just now, and I'd appeal to you to reconsider your preferences in the morning. And I hope you'll recall, I've traveled from Chicago to enter your employ and have no emergent prospects. And at this point, Alma sails right off the edge of, like, me being able to excuse her, because then she says, we'll come to some arrangement, with this tone and flick of her eyelids and toss of her head that really implies that she could not care less about this woman's situation, which is so rude and unreasonable. And I was real mad at her in this scene. I really, really was. Oh, it's so ugly. And I should note too that Alma is, like, she's dressing a little bit more flamboyantly. She had been wearing all the morning black, like, right up until we last saw her. And this episode, she's wearing some, like, silver and whatnot, and white again, when I feel like that's purposely, she's deciding, I'm coming out of mourning officially, kind of to say screw you to Seth and let everybody know that I'm available, is what I think that the subtext is there. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But I kind of like that idea of her just being like, oh, I'm going to let everybody know that, like, I'm not attached. I was keeping the mourning on because it was sort of like a twofold. It was both what I was meant to do as a wife. I'm supposed to mourn my husband, but everybody knew I was screwing you anyway. So it also made it clear that, like, I'm not available for anybody. But yeah, if I let everybody realize that I'm wealthy by flaunting my new clothes and that I'm not in mourning anymore, she's also wearing powder and lipstick, which we haven't really seen her do. This bitch is doing that thing where you, like, break up with somebody and then you, like, get in great shape and they run into you and they're like, oh shit, damn. And you're like, yeah, what? And the scene ends with her saying, you'll say goodnight as is your custom without having spared one affectionate look for my child. And Isringhausen says, my training, ma'am, is that being engaged to see to the child's education, my soliciting her affections would intrude on the mother's province. And Alma says, and I would call that a logical distinction, Miss Isringhausen, having nothing to do with the way people live. And it's very clear that she's not talking about this tutor when she says this. She is talking about the logical distinction between her relationship with Seth and his relationship with his wife. And like, it's just really unfortunate that Miss Isringhausen has to be on the receiving end of this. I feel for her so much. She's got nobody, like, she's here for this woman and that is it. And if she dismisses her, then she's just going to wander home alone with nothing? Like, Jesus Christ. Patrick says, my guess, Alma and Ellsworth scene. Alma's claim and title is being contested in court by her husband's family. So that's the legalities Ellsworth is referring to. Oh, okay. The other option is due to the camp's status, not yet part of the U.S. The legalities could refer to that, considering the size of her claim. I see what you're saying. I didn't realize. I think that they did mention that her claim, like her ownership, is being contested, but I forgot about that. I wonder if her father's going to pop back up again anytime soon, because I feel like he's got to be behind part of this. So I've talked about Cy Tolliver basically in passing in regard to his relationship with Francis. Cy is just even more upsetting and pathetic than I feel like I ever saw before. And he's with this girl, Lily, and she, like, says something about how she prays for him. And he gets so angry that he, like, tells her to go and turn over and face away from her, away from him, because it's clear, like, otherwise he's about to snap and punch her. And I hate him so much. Patrick says, Cy is a human toilet. You know what, Patrick? That's excellent. And I'm going to save that and use that. And I will credit you. A human toilet. That is horrifying. But yeah, he is. He's so awful. And so he like does this whole big blow up thing about like, you know, pretending that he's worried that maybe some people aren't loyal and going to walk away, like acting like these rumors that are circulating in the camp have already been circulating, that he's not planting the seed in their minds. And of course, his little, what do you call it? His little minions is what I will call them. Leon and the other one, the one that Nuttall unfortunately tried to make sheriff. They are not in on it because he like is about to introduce them to Francis in one scene. And Francis just says to him, I do not want to meet them, which I loved. I have to admit, I really did. And he recognizes his mistake and has to get them as like in on this thing without giving away what exactly is happening. So yeah, they all fall for it, long story short. And that's pretty much all that's going on there, is him planting this idea in everybody's heads and them going out there and sort of spreading it around. And that's about it with Cy. All right. Now let's talk about there's two more things. There's what's going on with Saul. Saul is recovering still, but Trixie is keeping an eye out on him. Now, I have to admit, guys, that I'm surprised at how much time Trixie is spending with Saul and that Al hadn't thrown a fit about it. Like, at this point, of course, Al is down for the count, so I wouldn't expect him to in this episode. But she's been, like, on their side of things. And considering the way that he reacted with everything when he found out that she had slept with Saul, he seems much more lax about like letting her roam around and hang out with this guy. And I'm really surprised. I'm happy about it, but I can't help but think this is not going to last that long. But yeah, she shares pretty freely with Saul that she does not think much of Seth, that she thinks that he's really selfish and putting everybody at risk. Saul is like, listen, he's my friend. Can you not? And she's like, I guess I'll like sit on my opinion, but you know what it is. And then she asks if he will teach her accounting. And when he agrees to do it, she says, I can pay you in money or you can take it out in cunt. And he says, I'm not going to teach you if you keep that up. And she gets really pissed and leaves. And later on is talking about it with Jane in what's probably the best scene in the entire episode. And she says something about how men just like lord it over you if you don't like their friends. And that's not what was happening. She was degrading herself, and Saul didn't like it. Because of course he doesn't. He cares about her and he doesn't want anybody to put her down. And she herself putting herself down is not okay. But she is trying to turn it into this whole other thing. Because a man actually liking her enough to want her to treat herself better is something that she is straight up not familiar with and makes her uncomfortable and afraid. And I know that sounds like such hooey, but like seriously, if you are somebody who has not valued yourself and no one else has either, it's not a good thing, but it becomes a familiar thing and it becomes a comfortable thing. And when somebody comes in and sort of shakes that up and implies that maybe you deserve better than what you have gotten your entire life, as much as you want to just say, well, that's a good thing, that's a hard adjustment to make. Like, whether or not something is objectively better and healthier isn't really the point. It's much more about like, I want what I already know I can function with. And you're trying to throw a whole new attitude into the mix. And I don't know how to use this. I don't know how to like operate with this. And in that respect, I really feel for her. Because she's trying to like make something happen with Saul, but she's so unsure of her footing here. And she should be, you know? So I just really want her to learn this, though. And I want her to be able to like make a way for herself doing something else. So let's talk about that scene with her and Jane, because it is great. It's so good, you guys. I want more of this. So Jane is not used to talking to another woman who is willing to swear and be angry the way that she is. And it's really, really sweet, actually. Preceding this, she has a scene with Charlie Utter in which he put Bill's jacket on her bed, like as a blanket, his old coat. And tells her basically that he's giving it to her. And she's like super touched by this. And I loved that moment. And her just like finally saying a nice thing to Charlie, which is thanks, Charlie. Like she never just says thank you ever. And she does. It's so sweet. But here, the scene between her and Trixie starts off with the both of them tossing back some kind of liquor. I think it's beer. But yeah. She's getting, like, drunk with another woman who's able to hold it just as much as she is. And Trixie says, cocksucker upstairs across the way. Whorehouse where I work. And Jane interrupts and says, he is a fucking cocksucker. Trixie says, locks the fucking door so people can't get in to help him. Fucking ashamed to be sick. And Jane says, you know, he had designs to murder that little one, and explains that whole situation. And is obviously like, you know, well, he's a piece of human garbage. But then Trixie is like, all right, well, listen, that may be true. And I won't deny that he fucking, you know, that he is ruthless and a murderer. But also, he does some things occasionally, like just out of the goodness of his heart, and tries to pretend that that's not what it's about. And then talks about Jewel. And she's like, you know, he jokes around about how she's there for guys who only have 10 cents. But he doesn't actually let anybody, like, have sex with her. She's not an option. He took her in as a way of protecting her. And I really enjoy this weird way, like Jane keeps on starting to talk, and she's so not used to being with someone who is louder and more angry than she is. And so she keeps starting it up, and then Trixie like goes, like steamrolls right over her, and Jane sort of backs off like she's fascinated. Like she's not used to this dynamic at all. And I think she finds it kind of like weirdly amusing, but she's also unsure how to handle it. She's at one point just says shaping up to be a nice, cool evening. Like she's trying to change the subject. Oh my God. It is so funny. And then she ends it with, maybe he has a good side to him too, that I entirely fucking missed. It's always fucking possible. And Trixie looks a little mollified when she says that. I am drunk fucking continuously. And then, it's nice to see you, before she walks away. And Trixie does not acknowledge this at all. Just takes another swig and another drag from her cigarette. And I swear to God, I was laughing so hard. This scene is so good. So good, you guys. So yeah, I loved this whole thing. And now we're going to talk, now that I'm at the very end, we're going to talk about what's going on with Al. Because, guys, there's not a whole lot to be said about this. Al is in a bad, bad way. And it turns out that, you know, they're going to have to, and it's weird. I don't know why this was on my feed recently, but I definitely, like, 3 days before I saw this episode, there was a picture from an old medical textbook circulating of this exact procedure of having to insert a like really fine tipped like probe up the urethra into the bladder and physically break into pieces the stone in the bladder so that it's in small enough pieces for the man to pass. And I don't know why this was on my feed. I think it was like a result of people like talking shit about vaccines and somebody being like, yeah, because our old like medical methods were really humane and great. But I don't know if that's it. But this is excruciating. The way that Al screams Mother of God at one point. And it sounds like he's like both screaming and on the verge of vomiting. That shit is rough. Like, I really... And the episode ends, and it's clear that they have, like, figured out exactly what's wrong, and that they're on their way to, like, deciding what actions to take. But it's not fixed. He's not done, you know? So it just kind of ends with him on the edge here. And we see the doc like cleaning one of his instruments and talking about like somebody saying like it's going to be so painful, and he's like, yeah, or he can die. Like, I don't really know what options you think there are, but guess what? I feel for the doc because, man, he manages to push through when somebody's in extreme pain. Like, he does it, but you know, like, he doesn't like hurting people, you can tell. And this is probably fucking horrifying to do, you know. I just can't imagine. Oh, guys. And Dan has to like hold him down because he's thrashing from the pain. Like, at one point Johnny like comes out on the balcony and Trixie from downstairs like screams at him like, go help him, what the fuck? And he's like, what am I supposed to do? And she says, put your hand in his mouth to bite down on. And he like gives her a look, but he does go back inside, and I'm like, you're about to lose that hand, son. Like, you better watch out. So yeah, that's the end. So there's a lot going on this time. And the next episode is Requiem for a Gleet. So I'm really hoping that this means that this is going to be over for him and he'll be recovering. Fingers crossed. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to let you all go. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you again to Patrick for commissioning this episode. And I will see you all very soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.